Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
We are coming up on the holiday season, which is crazy to say. Where did 2024 go? And with the holiday season, oftentimes you'll see seasonal workers. But also, a lot of companies have these contingent workers or contractors that will go through these cycles and come through. And so the question is, how do you secure these seasonal or contingent workers, contractors with zero trust? And I came across this blog on LinkedIn by someone named Kane Narroway, and it was really good. I'm going to put it into the show notes, and we're going to talk through some of the points, but also have, some commentary from me and Adam. I know Adam always has some colorful commentary that he likes to add, but I think when it comes to specifically zero trust with these seasonal workers, with contractors, the biggest issue is something that Adam and I preach all the time. If you're a listener of the show, you know that we are a big fan of managed devices. And managed devices is key to having zero trust with your company. And so, in general, I think me and Adam would say you must require a managed device to access any company data, period. That includes email, right? Just basic email. Yes, got to have a managed device to do it. And so, we'll talk through that, but there's this chain of trust that actually Kane has in their blog article. And I thought it was really good because they're saying that if you have absolute zero trust, then you got to maintain the entire chain of trust. And the chain of trust starts with a trusted supplier of hardware, and then a trusted logistics chain to deliver those devices, enrolling those devices into management, validating the device and the user upon accessing sensitive corporate systems, keeping continuity of the device through its life cycle, and then adequately removing data and decommissioning the device through disposal, recycling, buybacks, or donation. So I thought that was a really good kind of like chain of trust as you're going through this. And then we're going to talk about different methods of securing these seasonal workers with zero trust that may or may not break some of those chains of trust. And, with security, there's inherent risk with any solution that you choose. And I think no company is going to be 100% quote unquote zero trust. I think that's just extremely difficult to get to. It's something to strive to, of course, but you're going to have exceptions. You're going to have different reasons to accept risk in certain cases. So the best thing that you can do, I think, is to have a supplied device. So if you have a seasonal worker, if you have a contractor, you provide them with a company issued device. This way you have a trusted supplier of those devices. You also know the support model around those devices. Your help desk is familiar with the issues of that device and manufacturer. But there are certain issues when it comes to this, especially if the user is remote. You'll have logistical issues to get that device to them. If you have to send out a managed device, that gets really difficult. Now, if you're using modern management, join devices, autopilot, then you can just send them the device in the box. And with a lot of suppliers, they can pre-configure that device for autopilot without you even having to touch it. Gets sent to the user, they boot it up, connect to the internet, boom, managed into Intune, gets their apps deployed, so on and so forth. It's like magic. And then, of course, if they leave, you can always wipe the device via the cloud as well. If you are doing domain and hybrid join, then it gets more difficult because that device has to be set up on CorpNet. And so you got to maintain line of sight to the DC via probably VPN. And so you have to set it up, you got to get everything installed. And there's these like archaic ways that helped us do it. So I'm going to walk you through it. Adam, I know you're going to like roll
Cringe.
your eyes at this, but I mean, imagine in 2024 having a domain joined or hybrid domain join. I say a hybrid domain join, but when I say that, it really means domain join because you still have to set it up line of sight to the DC. So I hire Adam as a seasonal worker. He is a developer. He lives in New York City, or well, actually, let's say he lives in Des Moines because that's where he lives, and I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. I got to get him a device from my company, but we use hybrid domain join devices. So I got to image the device on-prem, and then I have to install the applications. And so how do I do that? How do I log into his user account? I got to cache his credentials on the device before I send it to him. Because if I don't, he's got to have line of sight to the DC in order to log in, which is difficult if you don't have like a device-wide VPN, right? If you have a user VPN, it's got to be logged into the OS in order to get into the OS. Then they have to log into VPN. So what do most companies do in this case? They set their password to something random. They have the help desk log into the user's account to cache that credential, log into the OS as the user, set up their stuff, then, close it out, get them mail them the device. And then when they get it, I tell Adam, hey, log in and change your password. Right. Here's the existing password. I probably put it on like a sticky note, like inside of the computer. And then I give you instructions to reset. Like how terrible, I mean, we're talking like 2024. How terrible of a model is that? And I bet you there are people who are listening to the show who still do that today.
Probably the majority, actually, in my experience.
And then when I need to get the device back, I can't just wipe the device. I have to, again, have line of sight. If I disable that computer account, it's going to have line of sight to DC to receive that instruction or just lose trust in general. And so I have to send the device back. There's all sorts of logistical issues when you're using a company device. In general, if you have the cash, though, to issue a device to every single worker, this is probably the safest bet to do that. The easiest way is to enter join the device and use autopilot, use modern management. And that way, you're getting all of your security policies, and the employee, seasonal or not, is getting treated just like any other employee with all of your policies.
Absolutely the way to go if you can. And yet again, just like last week, we're really starting to poke holes, not that they didn't already exist, in that hybrid join model, which, as you said, Andy, is effectively domain join. Yet again, I say, what are we doing here with agreeing to maintain and continue all these dependencies? And Andy, as you walk through it, I thought about the human cost of all of this. You have to have someone receive the shipment from Lenovo, HP, Microsoft, whomever, unbox it, put it on the bench, image it, sign in, install all the apps, box it back up. Now you got to go pay UPS or FedEx to ship it out to this person. Versus, by the way, you could have just had your vendor drop ship it directly to this new user. Hey, Lenovo, ship a ThinkPad to this person here. They have way better costs to ship than you do, and they will do it very securely, very effectively, and the user gets to shrink wrap the PC effectively, open it up, sign in with their username and password, and away they go. Get everything they need right there. It's far and away the best model. So again, it's time to modernize. And this is yet another use case that highlights that, if at all possible.
Another method of zero trust could be managed devices. And so very similar to the first option, with the exception that the contingent worker is going to provide the device. So they could either enroll an existing device into management, or you could do something like provide like a one-time cost stipend or something like that for them to go out and buy any device that they choose and enter join that device or enroll into management, MDM, aka Intune. It's still a fully managed device, but it does remove that entire complexity of sending and receiving a device. You could just write it off as a one-time cost, even, like just the cost of hiring someone new. You give them $1,500 or something like that to go buy a PC, and then say that that's just part of the perk of getting hired. it does break that first chain, first trust, step one of that trust chain, because you're not in control of the device supplier. You don't know where it came from. And so, that's a risk. But at the same time, hardware attacks are extremely rare. We're talking like someone injected, malicious code into the TPM or CPU or something like that at the manufacturer, and they're going to do some sort of hardware attack on you. That's like something that the majority of companies, 99.99% of companies, will never have to worry about. So yes, there is a little bit, a minute bit of risk in this, but most people, that's an acceptable risk. It does introduce some complexities in your support model. So if you are getting all of these different PCs, then your help desk might have to be a little bit more flexible in supporting that if there are issues. So different PCs have different drivers, different errors, so on and so forth. So that can be a little bit difficult for your first level tier 1 support. And offboarding could be messy. So when I say that, I mean, if you're enrolling existing devices, most of the time there's some remnant of your company, certificates or something, account is left over. It's not necessarily like you still can have access to data, but there's remnants that are left over when you enroll on device in MDM. And so for me, my best practice is whenever I enroll something in MDM and I leave the company, I just wipe the device. But that's easy for me to say because a lot of my information is stored in the cloud, like let's say phone, for example. My contacts are stored in the cloud. My data is backed up in iCloud. My data is backed up in OneDrive. Even on my PC, I just back up a few things that I need to, and I just wipe the device. It's usually a pretty quick process. But I'm fairly fluent in wiping devices. The regular person may not be, and maybe they don't have things backed up in order to make a clean exit like that. And so that can be messy, and depending on your level of risk or if you care, that can be a factor.
Last point first, of people having less familiarity with using cloud backup and cloud sources. I saw someone maybe a couple of years younger than me, but around my age, which, Andy, our generation, I think, is maybe the most tech savvy generation. I've seen memes how like boomers don't know what they're doing and Gen Z doesn't know what they're doing, but millennials, like in the middle, like we know what we're doing. She made the comment about how she got a new phone and lost all her photos. And I was just kind of dumbfounded, like how in the year of 2024 are we still losing photos when we switch phones? Like, you throw my phone in a lake, who cares? Like, I've got everything I need in the cloud. Like, the whole point is what's local to the device I'm not dependent on. But apparently, again, that's still a challenge for some folks, and we need to be cognizant of that. So as you walk through managed devices, obviously a second best scenario, there are additional wrinkles you have to work through. And I will say the biggest challenge here is going to be learning to say no. If someone brings in some consumer grade HP laptop they got at Office Max and they're like, I want to use this as my device, your help desk can't be on the hook to troubleshoot weird driver errors and stuff like that. It's got to be go call your OEM. Like, we're not responsible for that. You're responsible for kind of bringing a functional device to us, and we'll manage anything related to our management or our applications. But spelling those lines out, first off, legal teams aren't really great at that, but getting them to understand that, getting them to spell them out, getting the end users to agree to it, getting everyone to agree that we're not going to do this when you have a manager breathing down your neck saying, I've got a project due and we need this done and help desk just needs to fix it. Like, you can't yell your way to fixing things sometimes. You can't throw your weight around to fixing things. If people don't know how to fix it, they don't know. And if our organization is a Lenovo shop and we don't even have contacts at HP, like, what do you want me to do? So there are lots of rough edges to consider here. It sounds pretty good on paper. Bring your own device, we'll just manage it. But again, it's tough for a reason, and it really does require a specific level of aptitude on your end users to be successful with it, which is why most companies don't successfully leverage this model because of all those rough edges around it. It can totally work. And at places like, again, our employer, Microsoft, where Andy and I work, we are allowed to bring our own device and enroll it in corporate management. totally fine. Bring anything you want. As long as it runs Mac OS or Windows, you're good to go. But if like stuff doesn't work, like you can't call Microsoft IT and get help with it. It's they're going to be responsible for the management layer on down, but at the OS layer, at the hardware layer, that's all on you. And they're very good about telling you that. And so your organization would need to get to a similar place of comfort in managing that. So yeah, Andy, I think you walked through the gotchas pretty well here, but I'll just say this can be as safe and secure as sending your own hardware out, outside of the really rare hardware-based attacks Andy talked about. But for 99.9% of use cases, repeating, of course, this covers that very well. It's fine, but there's a lot of rough edges.
And it still requires you to have modern management in place. You still need Intune.
Correct. You can't domain join and SCCM your way through this. So you're going to have to be up to speed on, at a minimum, workplace join and Intune. And really a better posture would be Entra join if you can throw your weight around and get that done.
Now, there are ways to publish applications, corporate applications, via browser isolation. That's an option if you don't need a whole device to do something. If your app is like a web app, you can use something like App Proxy, which has been around for a long time. You can publish that application, and then you just need authentication, probably like MFA, of course, to access those applications. There are other ones that Kane had mentioned in their blog, like Zscaler and Cloudflare browser isolation. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I think it's the same concept where you're limiting the SaaS app, publishing that application via a web browser and then isolating it to that web browser. App Proxy is not necessarily browser isolation, but it is publishing an application on-prem that you can access via a browser and get access to that. So for App Proxy, it is for sure limited to HTTP and HTTPS applications, so port 80, port 443. But if you wanted to do something else, you could do like Entra private access, but that would require a client on the device in order to do something like that. So that gets even more into probably you want to have a managed device if you're going to do this. Next method, for me personally, I think is the best thing that most organizations can do if you can do it. If you can afford it, if you can manage it, is to use cloud jump boxes. Things like Windows 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, or like AWS Workspaces, where you have the infrastructure hosted within that service in the cloud, and you're just accessing it from any device. You don't need to have hardware issued to that user. You just have this jump box, so to speak. And the jump box can be fully secured using Intune or even hybrid management, and making sure that you have applications. It can have connectivity to CorpNet on the back end, and you have full visibility of what happens on that cloud jump box. Now, this does break one of the most significant portions of that chain of trust, because you're now accessing a jump box from a completely unknown piece of hardware. So you have no idea what posture that device is that's actually accessing the jump box. You know the jump box itself is secure. You don't know what is accessing it. But I think if you pair this with strong MFA, specifically like phish-resistant MFA, like a passkey or FIDO2 physical security key, and then you're managing it via Intune or even again hybrid management like SCCM, and you're managing that jump box just like any other desktop, deploying your security posture, your security tools like EDR and XDR, you have a pretty strong setup against a lot of the basic attacks like commodity malware, ransomware, credential stealers, identity theft, so on and so forth. So I think this is a really good way to give access to people. At Microsoft, I will tell you, Windows 365 is fully an option if you do not want physical hardware. That is an option for anyone who is up for a refresh. If they don't want a refresh, they can get a Windows 365 jump box. And then if they decide at some point they're like, this doesn't work for me, they can then, of course, get a device. And then any Microsoft employee can get an Azure Virtual Desktop. And that's something that I use on a daily basis. It does require a FIDO2 security key per Microsoft's policies, but I use it for work all the time. In the pass-through, if you're just using M365 applications like Teams and Office, it works amazing. I use it on my personal computer here, and I have my podcast set up with my mic and camera, and it just passes through to Teams, and it works great. So you can also mitigate some other risks by preventing like cut and paste or file transfers between the host machine as well. So that will again help secure some risk that might, if you're accessing it from an infected device, you're worried about something passing through, you can have policy that there's no cut and paste, there's no file transfers. So I personally really like this option for contingency workers. It's a lot cheaper than issuing physical hardware, and you get a lot less of the risks that come with just accessing data on untrusted devices.
I saw this pop up and thought, why didn't we lead with this? But then I realized with the framing we're using from Kane and talking through the chain of trust, you do lose some of that low level chain of trust because you don't know what the underlying hardware is that's connecting to, say, a cloud PC in Windows 365. However, and we've talked about this, Andy, in kind of our geeky friend chat, you can mitigate that risk so much that it really becomes a form of isolation where I have this isolated cloud PC that really has no connectivity between that and the underlying hardware, or very minimal, other than what's needed to support the service, of course. And it can be a very secure, very safe option. And I would point out as well, think of, as we've walked through some of the other models where you need to image a PC and ship it out, and then you got to deal with getting it back and all of those hassles. And just think about the fact that you just spin it up, you just provision it, it's just software, and just click of a button and here's another one, and the person can get operational right away. Where if you have someone who's only going to work for you for a couple months, waiting several business days to ship hardware there and back, like, you're already working for a limited time. Like, now you're cutting into more opportunity for this person to positively contribute their productivity. And I would point out too, in general, if you have contingent workers like working on super sensitive stuff, maybe you're doing it wrong. I mean, my opinion would be those should probably be FTEs anyway, without knowing details on exactly what project we're talking about. So I can't say enough good things about this. I know Andy was really effusive about it, and I am too. In all honesty, the best solution here is a Windows 365 cloud PC or equivalent service from some of the other providers out there. Far and away the best solution, because it acts like a PC. It's a persistent desktop. It's not something that gets created and destroyed, and I don't really have any day-to-day continuity. I can configure it how I want. Everything stays in place. Everything is custom to me. It feels like that tailored to me experience, just like getting issued a PC to me does. And because I can create it and destroy it on demand very quickly, what a great solution for someone who also may be coming and going from your organization in short time. So this is a really great solution. I am really not terribly concerned about some of the risks inherent here, unless you have a highly sensitive use case. To Andy's point, you can configure these services and turn off things that would create an opportunity for data or risks to move between the underlying hardware and then the cloud PC, as an example. If you don't have cut, copy, and paste enabled, if you don't have file transfers enabled, at that point, what's moving between them? Like mouse clicks and what's on the screen. And that's about it. I'm not terribly concerned about that. So I love this approach. And again, I would really encourage you to look at more of a persistent model than a non-persistent model. I think non-persistent just has a lot of flaws in terms of day-to-day productivity, where everyone works a little differently, and being able to configure and set up the system to meet their exact needs, I think there's a lot of value in that. And so I'm more supportive of that approach. I don't like non-persistent scenarios other than when you're delivering like a specific app or it's a specific very limited use case, then okay, sure. But in general, I'm persistent all the way, and that's why like W365 I'm a big fan of.
Now, Kane had a couple other things in his blog that I'll just touch on. I don't think they're things that I would personally recommend. He had managed VMs, which when he says a managed VM, he means like a local VM. And I just don't think like having a pre-configured, Parallels VM or something like that, or VirtualBox or something is something that I would recommend in any situation, especially because it requires you to have a more powerful host. So I would say that's probably not something that I recommend, but I guess maybe there is somewhere a use case for it.
Yeah, I struggle to think of one there too. And when I think of talking through posture for PAWS and SAWs, like privileged access workstations or secure access workstations, the one thing they don't want you to do is like build the more secure environment in a VM and then running the less secure environment outside of it. That's the opposite order to do it in. And so, man, if you're concerned about the risks of like a cloud PC, this is a million times worse.
Yes.
In every way. And also, since you don't manage the environment outside of the VM, that doesn't stop the user from configuring the hosting software in a way that allows a lot of cross-pollination between the quote unquote managed VM and the world outside of it. So I just think this is for so many reasons a non-starter, not even to get into like having beefy enough hardware, having the user have enough awareness and knowledge to be able to manage and run this, and all the challenges with it. I'm not even putting on my tinfoil hat, but I think the security posture of this is really fairly weak, and just it seems like there's so many better options than this. I just don't know why you would do this.
Yeah, exactly. There's some recommendation in their blog about posture-based exclusions, which is like if you are looking at different tiers of confidentiality for your data. So let's say you have a tier where anyone can access the data. If you have confidential data, these are applications that are accessible from, more secure devices. And then you have like a restricted tier where it's like the most sensitive. And so you can then, based on that, how you want to exclude different contingent workers from security policies if needed. I think that's a good plan. But personally, I would really try to strive for the same baseline across the board. If you're an information worker and we're securing the devices like this, we just go ahead and secure as best as possible that device. I guess if you have a way of separating it out by maybe like IP segments or something like that through a VPN, you can say, okay, they can only access this data from this IP, or you only have access to this application within this VLAN or something like that. You could do that. I know some companies do that through network isolation, but I think that gets complicated too, personally.
It's a useful exercise to have an understanding of how sensitive each application is and what are our requirements for each one. And depending on the different personas you have, if this person only needs to access email and can work with everything in the web apps for like Word, Excel, PowerPoint. So they literally need Outlook Online, Word Online, Excel Online, and that's it, and OneDrive. I can deliver all that through a browser. And I can turn on like you're not allowed to download files and just basically keep it all in the browser, kind of that browser isolation model we were talking about earlier. If I can achieve that and this person isn't going to have access to anything terribly sensitive, maybe I just accept the risk because my only real risk is like screenshots. That might be okay. And so I at least agree with the idea of have a sense of how sensitive everything is, because not everything is the secret blend of herbs and spices, right? It's not the Coca-Cola recipe. So having that sense of that is healthy and good. But I agree with Andy as well of it is, if you get too much into persona segmentation, you are just making work for the sake of making work, when instead you can just set a minimum security baseline and just everyone lives by it, and it will actually be more efficient in the long run. So I'm of both minds. There is value here, but you have to be able to realize, like, when you're segmenting too far and just say, let's just simplify and we'll have a couple of personas and call it a day.
And then finally, Kane talks about exceptions where, you could simply just build some exception rules in, and if you needed to, you can exempt your contingent workers, your contractors from your security and device compliance policies. I personally think this is a big yikes. There is a place for everything in security, including exceptions. I've worked in corporate security before. I understand there's always going to be a need for exceptions. Sometimes you just got to put your foot down, though, and say, this is the policy and there are no exceptions. Like in the case of, say, MFA, there should be MFA for all the things, and there should be no exceptions to that. Well, I'm going to correct myself because we do allow an exception for our break glass account. That's kind of the one thing that you exempt from MFA. So I guess we'll go back to, there are exceptions for everything. And so I guess if you absolutely must, you can build in exceptions to your security, and device compliance policies and just exempt your contingent workers if needed from those policies. So, that is a way to do it, but I think we've gone through a bunch of other ways that will help you have a better zero trust posture overall.
Agree. Exceptions will come up. They do happen. Having a process around exceptions, for example, having quarterly revalidation that we want to continue to offer that exception, having sign off and risk exception in the risk register on those exceptions, those are all good practices to have. And so the time to build an exception policy is not when you get asked for an exception, but ahead of time. So then even exceptions are handled through a process. Of course, you want to limit those. Of course, you want to be conservative with handing those out, but acknowledging they will happen and having a plan to deal with them is probably the best plan of action. And to my point I was making just a minute ago, being flexible with your security evaluation, your risk evaluation is helpful too. Not everything is the most risky or sensitive thing in the world. And so being able to kind of do a little give-get of, we'll give you this if we get that, is helpful too. That's a useful skill in negotiations and in life. Recognizing what you can bring to the table versus what you're asking for in return. And so security teams, as opposed to having a blanket, Dr. No kind of posture, being able to engage in those conversations and have them in a thoughtful and measured way is really helpful. And a lot of my negative experiences with security teams before I became one of us was with teams that didn't have the ability to have those measured conversations. They were all or nothing. They were extremists. Everything was the sky is falling. Everything was Chicken Little. And those are very difficult people to want to work with. And so in general, I guess my broader story here on the exceptions conversation is, don't be unapproachable, right? Everything is up for negotiation. Everything's up for debate. You're going to put your foot down at some points, like Andy said, but some things are open for discussion and there's ways to get to a mutually beneficial solution. Remember, we're always there to enable the business, not to impede business. And so finding a way to deliver the business in a secure way is the goal, not to impede the business's ability to get what they need done.
Well, that is our show for this week. Hopefully, we've spurred some thoughts in your head about how to secure your contractors and seasonal workers, and you'll take these lessons and go forth and do that. So thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.